afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Wednesday webinar on major therapeutic interventions in mental health, the third part of our series, and it's on CBT today. So the speaker is Dr. William Davies, Head of Applied Clinical Psychology at the APT, and I'm Amy George, Deputy Director here at APT. Lovely to see so many of you in chat, so feel free to pop all your comments and where you're from in the chat box. So our speaker is Dr. William Davies. He is a consultant psychologist and head of applied clinical psychology here at the APT. Post-qualification courses written by him have been studied by over 125,000 mental health professionals, meaning that his input has influenced interventions with literally millions of people. So it is all yours, Will.
Lovely, thank you very much, James. Welcome to APT's Wednesday webinars. And you'll recollect, those who are here regularly, and I know lots of you are, we have two strands going on. In red, we have major therapeutic interventions in mental health. And in blue, we have living a rewarding life. So we've done, in the red, we've done DBT, we've done motivation interviewing, and today is number 3, CBT. So that's today, and you can tell which we're on because I try and wear a color-coded shirt if I can remember. And who can come? Everyone can come, everybody's welcome. The red ones in particular are designed for mental health professionals, but absolutely everybody is welcome. And there's no, we don't even have a facility for taking money off people, so it's absolutely free. So here we are on CBT, and to clear up what it stands for, first of all, it either stands for Cognitive Behaviour Therapy, you spell it American like that, and that's what on the Beck Institute, that's exactly what they have, Cognitive Behaviour Therapy. Or if you look on the UK's National Health Service, it's Cognitive Behavioural, spelled in the English way, therapy. So whichever, either one of those is absolutely correct. There's millions of people using one and the other. Delighted to see so many people have got themselves registered for this, and not only registered, but come along, because it's such an important topic. In a sense, CBT has become the default approach to mental health therapy now, to therapy for people with mental health problems. So I'm delighted that you're here. And I'm also looking forward to hearing any questions you have, and Amy is very good at collecting the questions and putting them forward. So I don't look at the questions, but Amy does. So write any questions you like at any time you like. And also contributions, because I'm guessing that a lot of people here know a lot about CBT. And they're here because they just want to hear what's going to be said about it this afternoon, and they're just interested. So do by all means put forward your contributions as well as your questions, and I'd love to hear them all. This is the plan. There's 4 bits to this afternoon. To have a look at the main names in CBT, because there are some great names. The 6 pillars of CBT, the 6 almost like the things that make it work, the things it relies upon. And then to have a look at a little bit of detail, in other words, at unhelpful thinking patterns and cognitive interventions for those unhelpful thinking patterns. So let's get on and let's look at the players. Actually, I had a thought, Aim, so that might be that people would like to write in chat who they think are the main names in CBT.
No, I'm ready.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Right. Well, while people are thinking of that one, I'm going to move on. I'm afraid I've narrowed it down to, well, I can't remember whether it's 3 or 4 I narrowed it down to in the end. Let's have a look who we've got.
We've got an influx of Beck straight away.
Oh, well done.
Here we go.
You might, in that case, for 2 more points, you might want to know what AT stands for. Now, Aaron Beck is getting on a bit now. He's 99. He will be 100 this July, hopefully. And he's a psychiatrist, graduated from Yale Medical School, worked mainly in the University of Pennsylvania, and founded the Beck Institute for Cognitive Therapy. So there he is, and he's a remarkable guy. If you go on the internet now, you can pick up some wonderful videos of him in conversation with his daughter and with other people. I think the latest one he did was when he was 94, I think, 93 or 94. and he's still remarkably sharp. It's brilliant. This is
Got
his
a few more
daughter.
contenders. Yeah, sorry, I was going to say Judith Beck's making a surge in the comments.
Fantastic, yeah. A late run on the inside. Great home. Any other names?
Yeah, we've got Judith Beck, Paul Salkowskis, Jeff Young, Podesky's a popular one.
Great.
And Ellis and David Burns.
Oh, very good. Very good. Lovely. Well, we're going to come on to some of those. Now, Judith Beck, unlike her father, who is a psychiatrist, Judith is a psychologist and is president of the Beck Institute for Cognitive Behaviour Therapy and professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. I wonder if anybody knows where the Beck Institute for CBT is. It's in an American city, obviously, featured in a couple of great films. The city, one starring Sylvester Stallone, one starring Tom Hanks. The Beck Institute is in that city. So, but in the meantime, there we are. That's Judith, and everyone's quite smiling.
Celia has suggested Philadelphia. Absolutely
spot on. Well done. Philadelphia, which also is in Pennsylvania as well, of course. This is Judge Phyllis Beck, the first woman to sit on the Pennsylvania Superior Court, actually. And that is A.T. Beck's wife, Judith's mother. And I thought it was very nice that everyone is very smiley. So that's a jolly good thing. So obviously CBT works well. Now, here's several books. The one on the left, 1976, this was written by A.T. Beck, Aaron T. Beck, Cognitive Therapy and Emotional Disorders. That was written in 1976, so it's a while ago. And it didn't make as much impact as the second book that he was involved in, along with Rush, Shaw, and Emery. Written just a couple of years later, it came to the UK in 1979, Cognitive Therapy of Depression. And note that these books don't say CBT, it's cognitive therapy, because the predominant therapy at the time was behavior therapy. And it was kind of all-conquering behavior therapy. So the introduction of a cognitive element was very interesting and very exciting. But it was set against the background of behavior therapy. So in a sense, it was cognitive behavior therapy. And it was another 17 years before Judith, daughter Judith, wrote a similar book, Cognitive Therapy, Basics and Beyond, which again was a very successful book. But it was really the middle one that set the world alight. And if you read that even to this day now, it is still an exciting book. It's a very well-written book. It's very relevant. You can see how to apply it. There's great ideas expressed very simply for the complexity of the ideas. It's a very, very good book. It really is a classic and an enjoyable read today. But just after that, David Burns, inspired obviously by what Beck et al. Had written, David Burns is a Stanford psychiatrist who'd also spent time at the University of Pennsylvania, interestingly. So he was acquainted with those kind of ideas. And he wrote a remarkable book called Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy. And he wrote that just in 1980, very shortly after the textbooks. And that was, here it is, the one on the left, Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, 1980. And that was an extraordinarily good book. And it was a self-help book. And it's sold literally millions of copies. Well, this one here says more than 3 million copies in print, and that's not the up-to-date version. So there's millions and millions of copies about that. And it's excellent, excellent book. And then in 1989, he wrote a book which was more geared towards therapists called The Feeling Good Handbook. And that really could be read by therapists and patients, really. It was a good combination. Fantastic book. In fact, when we were running, APT was running courses during the 80s and 90s, extended courses on CBT. The Feeling Good Handbook was the textbook we used. Everyone who came on the course got a copy of the Feeling Good Handbook. it is that good, was that good, and it is that good. So I think that was really, he's almost like the unspoken hero of the piece. And I'm very pleased, Amy, that somebody mentioned his name, David Burns, because he's almost, I feel he's the unspoken hero, but it's good to hear him spoken. It's excellent.
And Celia has said that you can listen to him on YouTube, and it's brilliant.
Yes, yes, yeah. Another person that your contributors mentioned, James, was Christine Podesky. And she's another psychologist, actually, founded the Center for Cognitive Therapy in Huntington Beach, California. I was looking on her website, and what she says on her website is, Dr. Podesky is considered one of the leading CBT presenters in the world, appreciated for her depth of knowledge, compassion, and good-humored warmth. And even though she wrote that on her website, I have to say that is absolutely correct. She's an outstanding presenter and has really good rapport with the audience and obviously with her patients as well. Outstanding. And she wrote this book, which is the first edition. This is Greenberger and Podesky. And then a second edition came out later on in 2015, 20 years later, actually. So you can see the initial surge from 1978 to 1980 for David Burns, and how this one came out in 1995, and then the one on the right in 2015. Change the way you feel by changing the way you think, which was a very contentious idea originally, certainly. A lot of people felt, and still do, to be honest, that the way you think is largely governed by the way you feel. And if you get a bad night's sleep or whatever, then the way you think and feel is rotten, and so on. So they think it's just like a third thing that governs it. But the whole thing about cognitive therapy was you change the way you feel by changing the way you think. That was the idea. Okay, that's the end of the first section, Aim. So any contributions, any questions, anything anybody wants to say?
No, just if you're ready for a tricky one quite quickly.
Yep.
Why do you think CBT is so popular?
Well, it goes back a little bit, to be honest. I think that I can clearly remember being a therapist when it was introduced in the late 70s. And behavior therapy was exciting and good and working well. But those of us who are psychologists were kind of disappointed there wasn't more cognitive stuff to it. There wasn't more thoughtful stuff, mental processes, if you like. And it's the introduction of those mental processes that was the real sort of firing point for this. David Burns's book was fantastic. That really got millions of people interested in it. So you had people who were able to popularize it, like David Burns. You had people like Beck who were researching it. So it was the sort of magic combination in a way. And the interesting thing is that when I'm teaching CBT, people love the cognitive element. Do you know, patients, they don't love the cognitive element half as much as other therapists do. But it's so that's one of the reasons it got very popular. I think it's easy to teach. People love to hear about it.
Super. And a couple of people have said how good the evidence of its effectiveness is as well. Is that correct?
Well, that's more contentious than it used to be honest. There's a lot of sort of contentious stuff talked about there, where people have been accused of not publishing negative results and people not submitting negative results because they feel as though they come under criticism as therapists. If they can't make CBT work, they must be hopeless. So that is a little bit contentious, but that's a really important area which we'll come on to.
And if you're going to just recommend one book, which one would you recommend?
One book on CBT. Well, do you know, I mean, people don't like anything but the latest stuff. And if you want to go for the latest stuff, you need to go for the Overcoming series. So you have, it's all sorts of CBT books. It's overcoming depression, overcoming anxiety, and so on. My own one in that series is Overcoming Anger and Irritability. That is reckoned to be a very, very good series. If I were you were recommending one book, I'd go back to the Burns book. I think it's a cracker.
Super.
Yep. Okay. Pillars of CBT. Let's have a look at the things that it rests on. Now, the original insight was that three key factors interact with each other. So that there they are: thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Now, normally people come into therapy to address something about their emotions. Sometimes it's something about their behavior. It might be offending or various things. But more often than not, it's about their emotions. And one of the real realization was that these three interact. So that the hypothesis was that if you change people's thinking, so for example, if I come in to see you as a patient and I'm saying, look, nobody likes me, I'm hopeless at my job, I'm a terrible father and husband, and I'm depressed. And you as a therapist are likely to say, well, that's not really surprising, is it? If you think all those things, that's hardly surprising that you're depressed. Let's have a look at the evidence. You say, what was the first thing you said? Nobody likes you. Let's have a look whether this is true or not. Let's have a look at some evidence for it. Let's have a look at some logical evidence-based thinking. And that kind of caught on, a very appealing, very, very appealing approach that you can alter people's thoughts and thereby altering their emotions. And likewise, if you alter people's thoughts, for example, if you're talking to an offender, a criminal offender, maybe you can alter their thoughts in terms of being more empathic towards potential victims and thereby alter their behavior. In any event, these three are all linked up. And if you can somehow make people cheerful with cheerful music or whatever, then maybe their thoughts will perk up and you'll get into a benign circle. So that was a terrific insight, and that was the original CBT insight. And a lot of people have gone no further than that. They've just stuck with that and no harm with it. But two more factors were recognized as important, by particularly APT, to be fair, in the UK, but very much in the United States. They're pioneering it really, and Christine Podesky very much, with two extra factors, namely biology. So you got the three original ones: behavior, emotions, and thinking style. And biology was added to it, all set against the surroundings, and especially the social surroundings. And Christine Podesky came out with a great idea. She called this kind of thing the hot cross bun. So you got the four segments to it like that, and against the background of the surroundings, especially the social surroundings. So you can look at all five of those. Over here, we were calling it the Be Best factors, because you look at behavior, biology, emotional state, surroundings, and thinking style, and what you think, that spells Be Best. So it makes it easy to remember. So in assessment, you'll be looking at people's behavior, whether they're active or inactive, criminal or law-abiding, avoiding or confronting, and those correspond obviously to depression, offending, and anxiety very often. Biological factors like sleep in particular, diet and exercise. Person's emotional state, you're depressed, anxious, or whatever. Their surroundings, their environment, what they listen to in terms of music or news items, their housing, and very much their social contexts, their intimates, their neighbors, their friends, the people at work, and so on. And finally, the thinking style about their cognitive state, core beliefs, negative automatic thoughts, abbreviated to NATs, negative automatic thoughts, and so on. Of course, you don't only assess those, but when you come to intervene, that's also what you intervene with. For example, helping a depressed person to do more rewarding activities, helping a person question whether it's really true that no one likes them and so on, like the example I gave. Getting an anxious person to drink less caffeine, for instance. Supporting the patient's family and behaving more helpfully, perhaps, or supporting the person with developing their relationships in various ways. And maybe helping victim empathy in someone who exhibits antisocial behavior. But one way or another, your interventions will cover those 5 factors now. CBT is sometimes regarded as a magpie therapy. It kind of incorporates whatever there is evidence for now. So CBT, some allege, some people say, oh, it's become like just a byword for therapy because it's incorporated all sorts of things. But I think there's very clear 5 factors, and I think these are the 5 factors. This is what makes cognitive behavioral therapy now, even though some people are still sticking to the original 3. Okay, that's the end of the first pillar.
Just one question. If people are coming to you because of their emotional factors, why don't you focus on their emotional factors?
Oh, because it's so difficult. It's difficult to know what to say to a person who comes in and says, I'm depressed. And if you're going to just focus on the depression, what can you say? Be less depressed then. You might say, why are you depressed? But then that gets you back to all the kind of all the factors we're looking at here. Or maybe I'm depressed because my relationships are not quite as they should be, or I'm not getting any sleep at night, or whatever it is. But to focus purely on people's emotions, short of saying cheer up, it's difficult, Okay.
Yep, super.
So second of the pillars then is case formulation. And now, as in most therapeutic approaches, it's considered important to systematically make sense of the information you gathered. But CBT was one of the very early ones to do this. And there's various ways of doing the case formulation, but one of the most popular ones is the 6 Ps. Let's have a look what they are. First P is the patient's purpose in coming to see you, why they've come, their problem or their goals, or a combination of the 2. Second one is the predisposing factors. What predisposed the person to have the problem they've got? So if they are depressed, for example, I wonder what predisposed them to become depressed. For example, are there genetic factors going on, or environmental factors of various sort, or what? Third P is the precipitating factors. What precipitated this bout of depression, or whatever it is, just now? Have they lost their job? Has their partner left them? Or what would it be? What has precipitated the bout right now? Perpetuating factors, in other words, what keeps it going? Okay, something happened to precipitate a bout of depression or anxiety or whatever it would be, but what is it that keeps it going? What perpetuates it? And finally, or not finally actually, but at last, to take a positive view, what protective and positive factors are there? I got so excited writing this, and I put protective, positive, and protective. But whatever, positive and protective factors runs better than protective and positive factors. But any 2. And finally, the plan. In other words, the plan to help the patient. And typically, we would be working with the patient to make this formulation. Very often, the therapist will work in between sessions to think about the formulation, but we'll come back to the patient and say, what do you think about this? And we put it together with the patient. So you get those 6 elements to the formulation. Interestingly, though, with the plan obviously is to help the patient. And the plan is meant to take account of the preceding factors. What's perpetuating the problem, what positive factors are in operation, what we can do to eliminate those perpetuating factors and capitalize on the positive factors, and so on. And the plan should incorporate all of that. But it's very interesting when teaching this, a lot of people, they can do the first 5 of those steps, and then their plan is unconnected to the first 5 of the steps, which is very strange. But the idea is obviously the plan follows on from those previous steps.
Sorry, could you just explain what the protective and positive factors are?
Yes. Okay, I'll be this imaginary patient again. I'll come into you and I'll say, oh, everything's gone wrong. I've lost my job. The neighbours have fallen out with me. Thank goodness I've got a great wife who sticks by me through thick and thin and says I'm great. Another positive factor might be that the person has sufficient money, so they're not vulnerable through lack of money. Another positive factor might be that they're quite articulate or skilled or intelligent, so we may be able to use those factors in our resolution, those kind of things.
Brilliant, and that all sounds great. So I hope that's okay for the person that asked that question.
Okay, another pillar, really important and very appealing one, I think. Collaborative empiricism. Collaborative empiricism. Lovely phrase. It does run nicely off the tongue, and it's like 2 experimenters working together to find solutions to a problem. So the problem is that the person is depressed or anxious or whatever it might be, and they come to see the therapist, and then there's 2 people working together to find solutions to a problem. And that's a really important characteristic of CBT. And it's very sort of useful, and because it immunizes people against failure, because it actually implies that some of the things we try won't be successful. Others will be. It's a bit like, what's his name, inventing the electric light bulb, that he tries lots of different filaments, and that's okay. Lots of them won't work, but eventually he will hit upon the filament that does work. So that's exactly the same thing in therapy. Okay, sure, lots of things don't work, but we will eventually keep at it until we find the ones that do work. And that is the collaborative empiricism, almost a hallmark, or definitely a hallmark of CBT. And that is so important because we can be working with suicidally depressed people where hope for the future is like the key thing. Lack of hope for the future is key predictor in suicide. So we always want to have hope for the future. We're robust, that we're going to stick with it until it all comes right. Don't wish to embarrass Amy, but she was supporting somebody on the internet this morning, delivering a Zoom webinar. And the tutor was a little bit nervous because something had gone wrong. And we had to try various things. And Amy said, but don't worry, I'll stay with you until we sort it out. And that's, Amy said that specifically, but that's exactly what we're implying in therapy also, that we'll stick with you until we sort it out. Lots of things don't work, but we'll stop until we find one that does. Now, another pillar, problem solving, pillar of CBT is problem solving. Really important one. And what we've got here is, we'll look at these in a minute, the 5 stages of problem solving. But more than this, we go into CBT with a, how can you say, a sort of a problem-solving attitude. We're not perturbed that our patients arrive with problems. That's the whole point. We will help them sort out their problems. Whether we will use specifically a 5-point problem-solving strategy doesn't really matter. We might just have great ideas to help the person sort out their problems. And that's fine. And we will think of a skillful way of putting those ideas across that avoids actually telling people what to do, which has problems all of its own. But we love problem solving. We love helping other people sort their problems out. Just because we have a different perspective on the problem from the patient, we may be extremely good at that. But here we have the sequence: to write down the problem, to write down all the possible options, all the possible solutions, well, they're not always solutions, to be honest, but they are options. Examine those options, looking at the pros and cons, using a very logical part of the brain. Choose the option you like best, in a sense using a more emotional part of the brain, and finally act on the choice. That one needs to be there because a lot of people can go through those stages and not actually come to the last one. They simply do the first four very enjoyably and don't do the last one. So problem solving is one of the other pillars, and it's, I remember reading years ago on the NHS website, National Health Service in the UK, talking about what the main points in CBT, and they highlighted problem solving. And I thought at the time, well, it's a little bit weak. Of all the things you could highlight, it's a little bit weak. And it's not the most exciting one, but it's a real workhorse. It really works well. It's a very good one. Anything on problem solving, Ames?
Well, there was a few questions that aren't directly problem solving, but they're from a bit before. So I was going to hold off until the end just to keep you on your toes.
Okay. Whatever you think.
Don't worry, get excited.
Right. Now, another pillar. There we are, pictures of pillars. The standard session structure. Now, this is great. Patients come for CBT and they know there will be a standard sequence to what happens. They walk in and you will say, hello, how have things been since last time we met up? Since last Wednesday or whatever it is. Important question to ask because they may have lost a job, got a new job, finished a relationship, started a new relationship, whatever. All sorts of big things may have taken place. And unless we ask, a lot of people strangely don't tell us. How did the homework go? The project that you were going to do at the end of last session, the project we agreed on, how did that go? I have to say, a lot of therapists don't like the word homework, but as far as I've seen, patients never mind it at all. But project, homework, whichever word you like. Typically in CBT, there's always something to do after the session, something that will help the patient in some way, something that will move them forward in some way. And it's agreed, and you both agree on it, and off they go to do it. Then you agree on what you're going to discuss today, maximum 2 items normally. Then you tackle those 2 items. Then you agree what the project for the forthcoming week is going to be. You summarize, and you get feedback on the session.
Would this session structure also work with children and adolescents?
Oh, very much so. It's a very robust session structure. It's been adopted in all sorts of settings. It's interesting, actually, a lot of things that were sort of ironed out for CBT have been taken into all sorts of other therapies and kind of taken as like standard therapeutic practice, if you like. And this is such a good structure that one is kind of foolhardy not to use it. It's such a very robust structure.
And do you have any thoughts about dealing with lack of commitment to doing the homework?
Yes, you've got to, when you're agreeing the homework, it has to be a task that the person wants to do as well as you want them to do it. Sometimes it is frustrating, and I take the point of your questioner, because it is frustrating sometimes that you can see the best homework would be such and such a task, but the one the person is motivated to do isn't quite so good, but they are much more motivated to do it. And that's the one to go for. So long as it's useful to do, if the person is very motivated to do it, and at least it gets it done.
Brilliant. And what's the agenda? Do you know what the agenda is?
Oh, well, for example, the agenda items that might be particularly important to somebody is they may be telling you about their workplace is under threat. They may be being made redundant. They're not sure about it, and so on. So that's a key agenda item because that is very distressing for most people. So the agenda item might be to have a look at that and maybe find out more information about whether the workplace really is going to come to an end, or to look at other job options to see what else they could do if the worst happens and their current workplace folds. So that kind of thing, whatever is relevant to the person at the time or is relevant from the case formulation.
Brilliant. And do you find that this stylized session structure can interfere with the therapeutic relationship? Fran's found that and wondered what she might be doing wrong.
Oh, interesting. No, I've not found that actually, but I do take the point though that the, well, I wonder if it links up with Paul Gilbert's very good in compassion-focused therapy. And what he says is that if you look at all the stuff in CBT, it works much better if the person learns to be compassionate to themselves. The patient learns to be compassionate to themselves. So that implies that everything we do has to be put over in a compassionate kind of way. If the patient starts giving themselves kind of strict talk and telling themselves to pull themselves together and get this homework task sorted and so on, it doesn't work. If they tell themselves much more gently and warmly and supportively to do exactly the same thing, it works hugely much better. But I'm guessing that your questioner will already do that. I'm guessing that they already be warm and compassionate to their patients because that's what most therapists are. So, so who knows?
If that helps, Fran.
Just for the record, I find that people absolutely love this structure. They know where they are. It's predictable. They know what's going to happen. The next thing is evidence-based practice or practice-based evidence. Because evidence-based practice is a cornerstone of modern therapies, as recommended by NICE, and CBT practitioners set store by being evidence-based. And two of your contributors, Ames, they mentioned this right at the beginning, very importantly. There's good evidence for CBT. People debate it quite rightly, but there is very convincing evidence. But one of the things that Beck originally said right at the outset, and it holds good to this day, is that very often therapists have to be ingenious. They have to think of new ideas, inventive ideas, and so on. So we can't refer to journals to see the evidence behind such ingenious ideas that we've come up with. So what that translates in clinical practice is we have to rely upon practice-based evidence. In other words, from our practice, in our practice, we have to look for the evidence. We have to assess how the patient is progressing and base our progress on exactly that. And it's a great thing to do because it encourages us, it encourages the patient, and it is simply good, sound practice. So if you see the sequence of events, you've had, the 5 interacting be-best factors, you've done your assessment and case formulation, you've got your lovely collaborative empirical relationship, you've got problem solving built in right throughout it, you're delivering all that in your session plan, and finally, you're cementing it all together with practice-based evidence.
That all sounds good.
Well, as long as you're convinced, that's jolly good. Would you like me to move on?
Yep, no, ready when you are.
Okay. On to the last section, unhelpful thinking styles and their interventions for them. Let's have a look. We're talking about core beliefs and negative automatic thoughts, NATs. Now, let's have a look at core beliefs that interact with one another. Core beliefs tend to be centered around core beliefs about oneself. And it's always good to think of yourself in this regard, everybody, to think of yourself, other people, and the nature of the world and the future. And anxious people, they have core beliefs around themselves that they are incompetent. They're not very good at things. If a problem comes along, they probably won't be able to sort it out. They have core beliefs about other people is that they tend to be unsupportive or dangerous. So if a problem comes along, they probably won't help you sort it out. And they have core beliefs about the world and the future that it is unpredictable and maybe dangerous. Now that is, if you got those core beliefs about yourself and other people and the world, then in a sense, you are only right to be anxious. If you weren't anxious, then you would be, unwise. So those all fit together. But the great thing is, if you put a group of anxious people together, they all that kind of implodes. If people find that they're not as incompetent as they thought, they're just the same as everybody else in the group. Other people are actually quite supportive. They're quite helpful when in the weekly sessions, when we talk about the problems, everyone seems to be quite helpful with ideas and so on. And who knows, if I'm not so incompetent as I thought, other people are more supportive than I thought. Maybe it doesn't really matter what the world's like. 2 legs of the tripod have been knocked from under them, so the whole of the anxiety disappears. It's rather more difficult with depression, because depressed people tend to have negative views of self, negative views of other people, and negative views about the world and the future. So if you put a group of depressed people together, they think terrible things. It kind of feeds on itself. It says, oh my gosh, here I am in a group of people, all of whom are not doing well. And they look around and see other people in a similar state, and it just confirms their view of everything. So although you can do good work in groups with depressed people, it's much more of a skilled task, not necessarily a more demanding task, but there's more, you have to have a firmer protocol to it than with working with anxious people. Now, to finish off, I want to look at 4 negative automatic thoughts and the interventions we might use for them. One type of negative automatic thought is jumping to conclusions, sometimes called arbitrary inference, making inferences which are purely arbitrary. The person reaches conclusions which are arbitrary. They might be right, they might be wrong. For example, a patient comes in and says, my friend walked past me in the street without saying hello last Monday. It's because they've taken against me. I'm sure it is. That's the reason for it. They've suddenly taken against me for some reason. Well, that is jump to conclusions. It could be all sorts of reasons for the friend walking past the person in the street without saying hello. But the error for the therapist to make is to say, no, I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure they won't have taken against you. I'm sure they're absolutely fine with you. Because that is also jump to conclusions. There's no more reason to believe that is right than what the patient thinks is right. So what we do is hypothesis testing would be the recommended, the standard intervention, if you like. It's a great one for all sorts of things. Hypothesis testing, you say to the patient, how could we test out whether that really is the reason? Could you maybe phone them up, see whether they're talking to you in a friendly way? What do you think? And of course, you have to have the contingencies worked out for the hypothesis. Supposing the patient phones up their friend and the friend's really busy with something and says, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. Well, that might indeed be because they can't talk right now. They're really busy with something. So you have to have a sort of interpretation agreement, if you like, before you move on. But hypothesis testing is the answer, not simply jumping to a different conclusion. Negative automatic thought number 2, all or nothing thinking, where a person thinks in extremes, having only 2 categories for another subject. It's also known as black or white thinking, and that's okay, because it's not saying black thinking is good or bad, or white thinking is bad or good. It's just the contrast between one category and another. So all or nothing thinking or black or white thinking. One of my patients said she was a terrible mother. She's a terrible mother. And she had evidence for this. One thing had happened. And she told me why she's such a terrible mother. And as far as I could see, she was just not at all a terrible mother. She was rather a nice mother, as far as I could make out. But she only had 2 categories. And this was a guess on my part, that she just had 2 categories of mother. So I sort of tested that out with a standard intervention, which is graded questions, which are great because people are used to out of 10 or out of 100. And in this instance, it was, if there are 100 mothers all lined up in a row, and at one end is the best mother in the world, and at the other end there's the worst mother in the world, where in the line would you put yourself? And curiously, she said 70. Better than 70% of mothers in the world. You think, well, how's that? She's an intelligent, articulate person. How can she say that? She's just told me she's a terrible mother. And she knows she's just told me that. It's because of all or nothing thinking. If you only have two categories and you're not a perfect mother, then you must be a terrible mother. Stands to reason. And she was in marketing. She was a successful person in marketing. And she made a badge for herself saying grey is good. In other words, not just black and white. There are shades of grey in things. And because her black and white thinking, her all or nothing thinking, permeated all sorts of things in her life. Third one is overgeneralization, categories of negative automatic thought, where a person highlights one instance that is actually true.
Just before you move on to this one, everyone's just curious what you'd have said if the woman had put herself down the other end, or at 30, for example.
Oh, in that case, it really would be working on being a better mother. Well, it would be an intermediate step. We'd have a look at the evidence, because that would have been discrepant with my perception of her. So I'd be keen to say, well, what evidence do you have for that? So there'd be logical evidence-based reasoning, just like a court of law. So on the one hand, we have evidence, this amount of evidence for you being a wonderful mother. And on the other hand, we have this amount of evidence for you being a terrible mother. And let's see if we can make a kind of consensus in the middle, if you like, a balanced judgment in the middle. Logical evidence-based reasoning, they call that, and that's what you do.
Well.
Okay, overgeneralization is interesting because the person highlights an instance that is actually true. For example, you might go home, if you're a therapist, you might go home to your partner and say, I didn't help Mr. Smith. I saw Mr. Smith today and I've seen him 12 times. I haven't helped him at all. I'm a useless therapist. Now, it could all be true that you've seen Mr. Smith 12 times and he really is no better than when you first saw him. And that's the point, that you start with an instance that is true, but you overgeneralize from that to say, I'm a useless therapist. Now, your partner might simply jump to another conclusion and say, oh no, I'm sure you're not. I'm sure Mr. Smith is no ends better, really. I'm sure you have helped him. And you know perfectly well you haven't. So that's no use. But what they do is hopefully use guided discovery or Socratic dialogue. Socratic dialogue is used in two modes. Its one meaning is to mean any questioning that helps the person to think things through, just open questions, anything that helps the person think things through. It's also used, though, to when you're acting rather like a barrister, when you're acting rather like in court as a legal person. So your partner might say to you, well, how many patients have you seen today? It's just like logical evidence-based reasoning. Were they all like Mr. Smith? Did none of them got better in 12 sessions? And you say, no, the others have got better. So how many patients did you say? You've seen 8 patients today, and 7 of them are getting better, and 1 of them is not, namely Mr. Smith. So what sort of success rate does that give you? You've got 7 out of 8 success rate. So that gives you an 87.5% success rate. Okay? Tell me, what is the usual success rate for a therapist? Oh, I don't know, 60, 70%, something like that. So your success rate is 87.5%, and most people have 60 or 70% success rate. So what does that say about you as a therapist? So you see what I mean? It's like a barrister, and that is also regarded as Socratic dialogue.
James thinks it's a bit like Columbo. Thought you might like that one.
Oh yes, Columbo. Yeah. He's very good, isn't he? So he gets the person to take them through it. I'm sorry, I don't just get this. I don't just understand this. Just take me through it. Yeah. Interesting though, because Socrates is very good at that sort of thing, and you can, thanks to Penguin Books, believe it or not, you can buy in Penguin the Socratic dialogues. Just if you just go on the web, put Socratic Dialogues Penguin, and you can pick it up for £5 or £6, and it's fantastic and a very, very readable. It's a good read again, no matter that it's over 2,000 years ago. And interestingly, he of course was into dialogues. He didn't write anything down, so poor old Plato who had to write it all down. And but it's there. It's a good read. And the fourth and final negative automated thought we're going to look at is catastrophizing, imagining some catastrophe, often a chain of events might happen, but which is very unlikely to. So, for instance, I had a patient who said, this is absolutely what she said. It took some talking before we got to this point, but this is what she said. She worked in a bank, and she said, I might say something rude to one of our customers. Specifically, her fear was that someone would come in and say, how much money have I got in my account? And she'd go and have a look, and she'd tell them, say, £500, and then come out with a particular rude word, which I won't repeat, but she had a specific rude word she was afraid of saying. And so that was unlikely to happen, because how often has she done that in the past? Never. Second link in the chain was they'd be really offended. Well, of course, they probably would be. And they might complain to the manager. Well, yes, they probably would do. And the manager might sack me. Well, they might do. I'd have to go home and tell my partner. Probably would do. And my partner would throw me out. And then I'm going to be on the street, homeless and destitute. So it's interesting, there are some links in the chain which you could challenge and say, well, that's not going to happen. Notably the first link and the last two links. But there's other links which are perfectly feasible. And you say, yes, that probably would be the case. And the kind of standard intervention would be logical evidence-based reasoning to calculate out the virtual impossibility of what they predict and come to a more balanced judgment, which is the one that your questioners were asking about earlier on, Ames, that we had an example of it. What are the chances of you saying this? What are the chances of your partner throwing you out, etc.? Okay.
Well, looks good to me.
Okay. Well, there we are. That's, in summary, what have we looked at? The main names, the 6 pillars of CBT we looked at, didn't we? And some unhelpful thinking patterns in terms of core beliefs and negative automated thoughts, and some of the major cognitive interventions for those. So there we are.
No, I'm sorry, you've not let off that easy. I've saved some questions for you.
Oh.
Don't worry. Okay. Can you use CBT for people with learning disabilities?
Well, it depends on the person, to be honest. It's a good exercise. I've never done it myself. It's a good exercise. I've spoken to people who have done, and I've kind of picked up that 2 things. One, it is hard work, but 2, it really depends on the level of the person's learning disability and how closely you are to get the concepts across. Has to be at their level, that is for sure.
Super. If you, some CBT has a lot of sessions, but if you have limited number of sessions for CBT, how would you deal with that?
Well, supposing you just have one session, you're only allowed one session. In that case, you do a case formulation, which ends up with the plan, and you agree that case formulation with the person, and off they go, and it's up to them to implement that plan by themselves. And you'd encourage them to do that, and you say, well, the main things for you to do are X, Y, and Z, good luck. And although that sounds extremely sort of ambitious, it's amazing how many people are able to do that. And single session therapy is very interesting, and a lot of people only come for one session. And it's the effectiveness of the sessions declines as you go on. The first session is the most effective, second one is the second most effective, and so on. Session number 19 adds hardly anything to session number 18.
And can you think of clients that CBT does not work well for?
Not really, in the sense that if you're using the sort of modern 5-factor CBT that we advocate, frankly, and Podesky and so on, then you're looking at so many things. For instance, the biological factors, the social factors, thinking style, behavior. You're looking at all these factors, virtually everything that could really be relevant,
And one more. What do you think about computerized CBT?
Well, I rather like it, I must admit. I do like it. It comes from the same, you've got various phases of things. You've got your one-to-one therapy with case formulation, etc. Next step down is group therapy, where you go with sort of your set agendas and so on. Next step is self-help books. And they're very close to computerized therapy. The people who write self-help books, they really work out every sort of possible avenue that people could take and do it. And people who do computerized therapy do the same. And it's, I'm all for it. At the risk of putting everyone out of work, I think it's very good. And people are more willing to say things they wouldn't say face to face.
Brilliant. So I think we've just slid into 2:59. So just to finish things off, just wanted to tell everybody that it's completely free of charge here, as always, as our response to COVID-19 and its variants. So thank you so much for coming. I think we've had the biggest turnout ever. We've had hundreds and hundreds of you here today. So lovely to see you, and feel free to invite others to future events. We're not sure how many free sessions we're going to do. It depends on a couple of things, which is how long COVID lasts and how much interest there is. But seeing as there's so much, we could just carry on forever, I'm hoping. And as I mentioned at the beginning, a certificate of attendance will be emailed you by the end of the week, and a recording will be available at www.apt.ac/free webinars. So, or just go on to apt.ac if you can't face doing all the typing, and it's just type in free webinars to the search box. Is there anything you'd like to say, Will?
No, only thanks very much, James, and thanks everyone for coming. That is lovely. Next week, we're on to the blue one. It's Living a Rewarding Life 3, Social Factors, the Importance of Our Relationships. So next week, we'll be looking at relationships, and everybody, it's primarily aimed at therapists, but literally anybody can come. Service users, anybody who wants to can come, especially to the blue ones. The red ones really are aimed at professionals, but the blue ones, really anybody can come. And they're there as recordings after, so you can you can point people in that direction. And there we are. No, well, just say thanks for coming, everybody.
Nice to see you all. See you next week, I hope. Bye.